Hey,
Hey.
so wanted to talk a bit about This Can Happen and the upcoming
Mm,
conference and what it means for us at Inquest and in the United States, this topic.
yeah.
What are your what are your thoughts about why it's important, why we decided at Inquest to support and connect and partner with This Can Happen?
hmm
What do you think?
Well, one of the reasons I think is one of the reasons I was excited, or some of the reasons I was excited, that we were working with, partnering with, involved with it in any way, um, is that we have a strong tie to disabilities.
Mm,
And people who have disabilities, what can we do to help these people be respected more and not impacted by biases and preconceived notions and ignorance of other innocent ignorance and then embraced ignorance of people. And so, with that in mind, under that umbrella has always been for me mental illness and emotional illness too. And I put those things together a lot.
mhm. Right.
Um, and my whole, I think our whole, everything that we do is about what can we do to help people feel welcome, valued, respected, and heard. And I add a fifth, understood,
Yeah.
in there for who we are as individual human beings, and then for what we do.
Mm,
And this is people who have the diagnoses and experiences of mental and emotional illness. First of all, it goes across all other dimensions of diversity.
mm,
And so it just impacts so many people, those people with the diagnoses, and then those people who love and care for them. And I've been one of those people. So there is the intellectual knowledge of it, there is the professional commitment that we have as an organization at Inquest. And then there's the personal passion that I have around this topic. Anything that I can do to help make the lives easier for people who have been diagnosed with mental illness, I'm down. It's easy for me.
yeah. Yeah.
How about you? How would you answer that question?
Much the same way. And I think one of the reasons I appreciate their approach is it's about mental health overall. So it's about our diagnoses and it's about our lives. And
Yeah.
it's about the reality that we all go through things.
hmm
And our humanity involves struggle, pain, vulnerability, insecurity, etc., and illness.
hmm
And being able to normalize that reality. One thing that I've been so impressed by, the quality of the conference is amazing. And I was super impressed by that. And in the United Kingdom, the stigma against mental health and mental illness issues has been addressed head on in ways that we have not done that in the United States of America.
hmm
And I think it is essential, essential that we hit that stigma head on and do everything in our power to diminish it, to remove it, to address it, to call it out, because I think it still exists in so many areas and in so many arenas. And of course, stigma is different depending on what demographic you're from,
hmm hmm
you're
hmm
from, and what part of our country we're from, right?
hmm
So all of those things, stigma around either going to therapy, being in a being in therapy, um, can be very different depending on where we live and who we live with.
hmm
And I think appreciating some of those struggles and challenges and the uniqueness of those the impact of our culture, it's really our culture, the impact that our culture plays on our relationship to mental health, mental wellness, etc. And generation is a part of this too.
So, so many wonderful things that you're saying. Why do you think? I mean, yay for the UK.
Yeah.
They are approaching this more aggressively or at all in the way that they're doing it. But why do you think we are not in the United States?
I think there's a combination of reasons. I think part of our history, our ethos, is sort of a symbol of strength, of sort of the Marlboro Man, of being the consummate winner, the victor, the I'm not going to struggle, I'm not going to be afraid, I'm not going to. And I think in many ways that's been our image of strength, of leadership, and masculinity. And I think that all of those things, especially in a corporate context, those norms and those values have permeated the history of corporate America. I mean, they've defined, they're not just permeated, they defined. And so it's not surprising that vulnerability, fear, insecurity, uncertainty is seen as weakness rather than humanness.
Yes. That's good. Seen as weakness and not as humanness, because human beings have strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And then there's the judgment. A friend of mine in her teens received a diagnosis of bipolar and paranoid schizophrenia. And we often talk about some of the things that she does as a result of being happy. And I have done the same thing. But her family, when we are together, look at her differently, doing the same thing I'm doing, then they look at me. And what I'm struck with is some people, some groups have permission to be human and to just act out, to react, to respond. And some groups, some people, because of the deliciousness of their diversity, they're not given that same permission, that same respect, that same understanding. Instead, they're held with judgment that something's wrong instead of, oh, she's just being exuberant.
Yeah.
And not only is she being exuberant, let's join in, as opposed to something's wrong with her, let's put her away.
Yeah, I think, and certainly the UK, and but I think my understanding is Canada is further ahead than us, Australia, many
I
other
believe it. I
yeah.
believe it.
So, and I think in all of those countries, there's been a history of putting away those who we deem to have mental illness. And when I say
Yeah.
away, it could be actually in a facility, or it could just be sort of marginalized, reduce,
Hidden,
reduce.
somehow
Yeah,
hidden,
yeah,
not seen. Yes.
exactly. And then I think there's also the reality that for some communities, who they are was actually once deemed a mental illness. For lesbian, gay, and bisexual, you're pointing at me, but so homosexuality wasn't removed from the DSM till the 1973.
Yeah.
What does that say?
Yeah.
When I was born at a time when it was considered a mental illness.
Yeah.
My parent, you lived much, big part of your life, it was considered illness.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, of course, that impacts our sense of self, our sense of wellness, our sense of health, entitlement to health, etc. Right. And of course, that's one example of that dimension. Go on.
I have been speaking with and in touch with my own ethnicity that is Native American. lately.
Mhm.
And I was just speaking with somebody uh, about how people who were said to have a mental illness were treated in Native American cultures, in the indigenous cultures on this continent of North America. And those people were really revered.
Yeah.
It was looked at as a gift. Their otherworldness was, you are here and you have access to another existence as well. And so it, even during all those times, it was the time for some people, was the generation for some people, but culture, as you mentioned, had a lot to do even in those times.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think this goes back to our earlier conversation about the stigma here in America. I think in America we have, a history of a hunger for conformity in
Mm,
so many areas. There's sort of a, this is the right way to be married, and this is the right way to be happy, and this is the right way to be successful. There's cultural versions of that also. And I think
mhm,
overall in America, and certainly in the 50s and the 60s, there was, until things really began to change in the 60s, there was this sense of, at least in white America, we're all going to live in the same kind of house. We're all going to, the suburbs were constructed for that kind of sameness. And it wasn't about celebrating difference. It was about celebrating sameness.
that's right.
And I think
That's right.
anything that was outside of that was
Mhm.
deemed as less than, problematic, not enough, etc.
Yeah, and
It's
people
an
not
overstatement,
comfortable.
of course,
Uh,
but I think there's a history there.
and people's discomfort with people who were different, and they spell different, WRONG,
Yeah.
because it's not like me, and I know I'm right.
Hmm.
I'm good.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think that was some of it, in looking at ourselves and the world through narcissistic eyes. And comfort, instead of working to understand and celebrate those differences and not judge them with negative stigma, that there's no good thing in it at all, instead of it adding more to our lives. The Native Americans looking at it as more, it's this and that, not this or that. In your study about living in a, what is it,
Searching for and in a world of war.
there it is.
And I'm going to piggyback on that.
Okay, okay.
This idea that we need to be ourselves at work, right? Or we should be able to be ourselves at work. Some people say bring your whole selves to work. I
Mhm,
feel like there's parts of me that should not be in the workplace, right? And we should all be able to be ourselves at work.
mhm,
But
mhm.
if we need to be able to be ourselves at work, that means who we are in our humanness. And that means our struggle. That means, our unique learning styles. That means our unique, it could be optimism. It could be, um,
Name it.
yeah, name it. But, and our struggle, when our families are struggling, when our loved ones are struggling, I think for me, you've been with me, some of the hardest days of my life as a parent,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm.
If I felt like I couldn't look at you and say, Gloria, my phone is on in case Eli needs me today at the beginning of a session with a client,
Yes.
I wouldn't have been able to be myself that day. And I
Yeah.
would not have been able to pay as much attention to that client and my son or my phone that day. And it enabled me to keep working through some hard days.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Right? And then as a man also, that can be tricky.
So one of the things that's coming out from this for me is, and this is coming, I've gotten really, really clear about this as we're entering into going through these pandemics that we're going through, how things have slowed down in many ways. Some ways they've expanded and
Yeah.
they're faster than ever.
both and.
both and. So we have to look at that. One of the things about our discovering that our normal is gone, we may never recapture that normal again, is going to have to be a new normal. One of the things is looking at how important it is for us to have allies and advocates.
Mm.
And one of the delicious things about allies is that they create a safe place for you to be yourself. It is about honoring you in your humanness, honoring the differences
Before you
between,
talk about this, I want to ask you a question.
yeah,
I want to ask you a question, and I want you to go back for a second, if that's okay.
yeah,
What does allyship and advocacy have to do with mental health? Or what?
mm, yeah. So every human being, every living thing, every living thing needs an ally, someone who cares for them, someone who will be there with them, someone who's not trying to change them, just hold the space for you to be safely who you are. Hold the space for you to be safely who you are. And then, if they're an advocate for you, then they are out there saying to other people, look at the deliciousness of this right here. We need this person. We need this process. We need this thought. We need these things because it impacts all of us to help us all grow, to see what it is. Wait a moment, this is good. Wait a moment, maybe not that. How can we use that as a springboard to elevate, consistently elevate? Instead of looking at it as, I'm uncomfortable with that. It's nothing I've ever seen before. You need to go somewhere, sit down, be quiet. Wait a moment, let me lock you away. And so that is why it's so important, because this is what we've done with people with mental illness. We have either physically shoveled them off or locked them up right in front of us so that their humanness, the stigma is something is wrong with you as a human being. And there's nothing good about it. And I am so uncomfortable with it that I want it to be removed. And if you can't remove it, you better hide it.
Mm.
You better hide who you are. Bring your whole self to work, not that part.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Not that part. And the judgment that goes along with it. You know, I sing all the time as a mezzo soprano, a dramatic soprano who is toured around the
You're
world.
dramatic? You're dramatic? Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I could, I could sing all the time. And this is how I think bring your whole self to work is a wonderful thing. I got my whole self no matter what, no matter where I go. I've got my whole self. And some things shouldn't be explored at work just because even when they're good, they take our attention away from what we're doing. And work is compromised somehow. Well, whatever that is, that shouldn't be. But wait a moment, sometimes at a party, you might like me to sing.
Mm.
Sometimes, and when we're talking about creativity, you might want somebody who thinks differently. I think that's why allyship and advocacy is so important.
Mm.
What do you think? Thank you. Thank you for asking me that question.
Yeah.
See, I have no passion around that at all.
um, to me, allyship and advocacy is so essential because it enables us to focus on both understanding
Mhm.
and taking care of one another. And I think that one of the things that so many of us are going through right now is just feeling like it's hard to take care of myself, it's hard to take care of other people. And at the end of the day, no matter what's going on in the world, one of the things we can continue to do is take care of ourselves and one another. And that to me is the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm.
And it's where our ability to um, focus on those relationships, not necessarily on our divides, but on our are uniting features. And importantly, back to that understanding that you were talking about: welcome, valued, heard, respected, welcome, respected, valued, heard, and understood.
Yes.
It's where that deep understanding can happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it happens that way is because you're not trying to change the other person.
Thank you.
You're not trying to tell them what you think. You are both simply and profoundly striving to hold that space and to be there for them in a way. One of my favorite questions that I think we're pretty good at asking ourselves, and we're not that good at asking ourselves. We're good at asking one another.
Hello.
What do you need? How can I support you today in this, about this issue? What do you need? How can I support you?
What a question.
And how infrequently does that happen? And how much better would our world be, our teams be, if we looked at one another and said, how can I support you?
Yeah, I think we ask, what can I do so you'll be like me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm right. I know it. I'm good. You should be more like me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to be like Mike. I want you to be like you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love Michael Jordan. Met him. He's a nice man. But I'm not trying to. There's one Michael Jordan, other than the Michael B. Jordan, the actor. We're not talking about. But there's one Duncan basketball playing ever in the Hall of Fame, Michael Jordan. We don't need another person just like him.
And nobody's confusing me with him anyways.
Really? That's good.
Should we press stop and then start recording another one just to have different files so they're not as big?